Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tesla Tomorrow. I'm your host, Richard, and today we're thrilled to have a very special guest with us, Hugues Jacqemin, the CEO of Northern Graphite. Thank you for joining us today, Hugues.
Thank you for having me, Richard.
You're welcome. Well, let's start with the basics. What is the value proposition for graphite? When we talk about EVs, we always hear about lithium, maybe copper, or even nickel, but not much said about graphite.
Yeah, graphite is a very important component of a lithium-ion battery. It's basically almost 100% of the anode, which is the negative pole of a lithium-ion battery. And the purpose of the anode is to basically store the lithium ions that come from the cathode. And so it's a very important part of the battery. By weight, for sure, it's the largest amount of minerals in the battery itself.
Okay. Well, there was news just a few days ago about China putting export controls on graphite, and then all the graphite stocks around the world started surging. Why was it such a big deal?
Well, if you look at the graphite industry as a whole, China has always led the way in terms of both producing the natural graphite from the mine, but then also processing that natural graphite into what we would call a battery anode material. And today, China produces about 90% of the world's anode material from its graphite mines. It's it's quite a big news because up to now, most of the graphite coming from China was also being used all around the world. But as graphite becomes more and more critical, the Chinese government announced on Friday 2 weeks ago that they would basically require any company producing graphite and graphite anode material to apply for a permit in order to export their materials outside of China. And therefore, the news basically made it clear that if you are making batteries around the world and you need graphite from China, the Chinese government is going to control what will be exported and what will be available to do that. And because it's such an important part of a battery, it's really caught on quite a bit of concerns from everybody around the world making batteries, and I guess the investors who look at graphite and graphite stocks started to see a real opportunity for producers outside of China to basically capture that market share. And for us, Northern Graphite, this is great news because, we are the only producer in North America at the moment. And therefore, we're in a great position to be able to capture some of that market share.
So, why would China want to have these export limits? What's in it for them to limit graphite exports?
Well, they want to use it for themselves first, right? Today, what China really wants to do is to conquer the electric vehicle industry on a global basis. And therefore, graphite being such a critical mineral and not a lot of it being available outside of China, they want to be able to use it first before it gets exported to other manufacturers around the world. And therefore, their purpose of putting these controls in is to just make sure that they can build the batteries and the EVs and basically conquer the market with their vehicles.
So, mining companies tend to be tied at the hip with the underlying price of the commodity. Where are graphite prices today, and how did they react to the China news, and what's the outlook for the future?
Yes, actually, when the news came out on Friday a couple of weeks ago, the price of graphite materials in China went up 9% overnight. And therefore, one would expect that because supply is controlled versus demand, that, prices would continue to surge. And therefore, it would make producers like ourselves, producers outside of China like ourselves, uh, put them into a much better position from a market point of view and a revenue point of view.
So, let's talk about your company for a little bit, Northern Graphite. What is your value proposition, and What makes you stand out from other companies listed in Canada, the United States, and abroad?
Yeah, our value proposition is, we are a fully we are a fully integrated supplier of graphite and graphite materials into the market. We have three large deposits. One of them is in Montreal, in Lac des Îles in Quebec, and we are today the only producer of graphite in North America. Then we have another deposit in Ontario, which is basically shovel ready, that we are going to be developing and putting into production in 25. And then we have another deposit in Namibia, which is called Okanjande, and that deposit is rather large and will be coming into production at the end of 24, beginning of 25. So if you look at our capability today, we are able to mine and produce graphite materials outside of China and take those materials to be processed into making anode material. We're planning to build a large processing facility up in northern Quebec, in Baie-Comeau. And if you look at our value proposition versus most of the graphite companies out there, they're still at the development stage. And therefore, we will be early. And we will be capable of offering our customers with the materials that they need rather quickly compared to most of the producers out there. The second point is that we do have quite a lot of resources with our three deposits. If we develop them over the years, we will be able to mine and produce about 300,000 tons of natural graphite flakes. And this is significant as part of the overall supply chain. We are not building a small mine, but we're actually developing three mines at the same time. And the capacity we will have out of the three mines will enable us to be one of the larger producers out there. And then thirdly, because of our plans to move downstream and also build a processing facility in Baie-Comeau that will produce anode materials, we will be a large producer of graphite and anode material. And we will be able to meet the demand of the industry as it ramps up and facilitate the growth of the battery industry by supplying our materials.
So, how much graphite is going to be needed to build all the gigafactories we keep hearing about, and how much is there actually out there?
It's a very good question. If you look at a battery on average, 1 kilowatt-hour of capacity of a battery will require about 1 kilo of graphite. An average electric vehicle will have a battery of about 80 kilowatt-hour. So that means that every electrical vehicle that will be produced out there will need about 80 kilogram of graphite in order to produce the battery that will go into those vehicles. And if you look at the demand for electric vehicles, we're talking about millions of electric vehicles that will be built and supplied. Usually, when you look at the battery industry, we talk about gigafactories. An average size gigafactory will produce about 50 gigawatt-hour of capacity. And therefore 50 gigawatt-hour will require about 50,000 tons of graphite. So with our 200,000 tons of anode material that we would produce out of Baie-Comeau, we could basically supply 4 gigafactories with their entire needs. And it's forecasted that several hundreds of these gigafactories are going to be built over the next 10 years. So even though, we have quite a large capacity of graphite and graphite anode material coming on stream, we still only represent a relatively small part of the market as a whole. The forecast for gigawatt-hour production by 2030 is about 7 today, 7 gigawatt-hour. So we're talking about 7 million tons of graphite. It's a lot, And so even with our 300,000 tons of graphite and our 200,000 ton of anode material, we're still a very small part of that 7 million tons that's going to be required.
So, what is your growth strategy to be able to service that coming demand? What are your main growth catalysts?
The main growth catalyst for us is really developing our 3 mines. If you look at our mine in Lac des Îles, we're currently undergoing some exploration there to add more resources to the existing facility. And we want to ramp up from the existing 15,000 tons per annum to 50,000 tons per annum in Lac des Îles. If you look at our facility in Namibia, we have the ability to produce 32,000 tons with the first step. And then we can then move to phase 2 and phase 3 of a project, each of them adding between 50 to 60,000 tons of capacity. So Namibia could produce as much as 150,000 tons a year. And then our project in Ontario, we're just finalizing a few permits, and we'll be able to start engineering the facility and constructing the facility to be in production in 25 or 26. And by then, we'll be able to go into phase 1, which will be 40,000 tons. And then from phase 1, we can move into phase 2, which will add another 60,000 tons. And so the catalyst for us is really around finalizing the exploration in Lac des Îles, and then restarting the facility in Namibia, and then developing the mine in Bissett Creek in Ontario. In parallel to this mine development, it's really about developing our processing facility in Baie-Comeau. Our first phase of the project will allow us to build a 50,000 tons processing facility, and then we can grow that into a number of different phases that will take it all the way up to 200,000 tons.
So it sounds like you need to spend a lot of money to get all of this done. How are you going to finance all of it?
Well, as I say, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer to that is one bite at a time. So our plans is really to do this step by step. By first consolidating the existing mines that we have, building the new ones, and then ramping up the processing facility according to the demand that is built in the market with the Giga factories that are being announced, so that we have a very modular approach to our expansion, so that we can increase capacity as demand ramps up into the marketplace. And this will enable us to secure offtakes from customers, and based on those offtakes, be able to secure additional funding in order to grow. But the big advantage that we have is we are already in production today. We already have about 100 customers that purchase graphite from us, and therefore we produce revenue, and we can basically ramp up our business, benefiting from the existing business that we have, and as we grow that existing business, create the revenue and the cash flow that we need to be able to justify the investments that we have coming down the pipe. Furthermore, we are also talking to authorities in Canada and in the United States to be able to benefit from some of the funding that's being made available out there. So we're working with those authorities to try and secure some of that funding to complement what we have to spend ourselves.
Well, as you look forward, say 3 to 5 years, how much do you expect the EV panorama to have changed versus the previous 5?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it today, there are not many EVs that are made outside of China. Of course, in the US, you have Tesla and General Motors that have been able to build quite a few vehicles, but it's still a small number compared to what is happening in China. We also have Ford that has built some vehicles in North America. But really, most of the electric vehicles today are being built in China. So in the last 5 years, the Chinese government has really taken electric vehicle as a key growth industry for them, and they've invested heavily into that industry. I think what we're seeing now and over the next 5 years is the North American countries such as the US and Canada are also investing heavily into the space through a number of different grants and policies such as the Inflation Reduction Act in the US and the Critical Minerals Act in Canada. The industry is latched onto that, and so what we're seeing is a lot of companies are now announcing large gigafactories and are announcing electric vehicle factories that built on in the West. The same thing is happening in Europe, where a lot of European OEMs are now starting to build capacity for electric vehicle. And so if you look at the numbers, you can imagine that basically Europe and US and Canada will account for about 40% of all the electric vehicles that will be built in the world, whereas China will continue to lead with about 60% of the vehicles, all the electric vehicles being built there. And so it's really about how can Europe and North America, become a key player in this industry, and how quickly can they ramp up the capacities in order to compete with China.
Okay, well, thank you. It's been great having you with us today, Hugues. Your insights into Northern Graphite and the industry at large have been very informative. Thank you for taking the time to share your perspective with us and our audience.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. If you want to know more about Northern Graphite, you can find a link to their website in the description below. And until next time, I'm Richard, signing off. Take care and see you in the next episode.